The Achaemenid Empire was the first Persian empire, stretching from modern-day Iran to Egypt, Babylonia and parts of Europe, including northern Greece. Under Darius the Great, it reached its largest size. Darius unified this vast territory through standardized currency, measurements and Aramaic as the official language. The empire was divided into satrapies, each governed by a satrap loyal to the King of Kings. After Darius died, his son Xerxes ruled, but his reign marked the beginning of the end. Internal unrest grew as the satraps began acting like independent rulers, hoarding wealth and sparking revolts in regions like Egypt, where Persian rule was deeply unpopular. Heavy taxes, economic stagnation, and reduced agricultural output followed, weakening the military and the empire's ability to govern. As Persia weakened from within, Macedonia, under Philip II and then Alexander the Great, rose to power. Seeking revenge for earlier Persian invasions, Alexander invaded Persia in 334 BC. He defeated Persian forces at Granicus, Issus, and Gaugamela. Darius III fled, but was later betrayed and killed by his own men. Alexander refused a peace offer and instead marched into the Persian heartland, taking Persepolis. By 330 BC, the Achaemenid dynasty was finished. The Macedonian Empire. After Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire, the Macedonian Empire stretched as far as the Indus River. It was the most powerful in the world for a short time. But when he died suddenly in 323 BC, without naming a successor, his generals fought over control. Their wars shattered the empire into rival kingdoms, but Macedonia's real decline began with the rise of Rome. After the Third Macedonian War in 168 BC, Rome crushed King Perseus, abolished the monarchy, and set up client republics. A brief attempt to restore the kingdom failed in the Fourth Macedonian War, and by 148 BC, Macedonia was a Roman province. Rome then expanded its grip over the rest of Greece. In 146 BC, it destroyed Carthage and crushed the Achaean League at Corinth, marking the full start of Roman Greece. The last Macedonian dynasty, Egypt's Ptolemies, held out until Rome annexed Egypt in 30 BC. The Roman Empire's collapse unfolded over centuries. Early stability was undermined by the rise of Christianity, challenging Rome's traditional polytheism. The clash eroded unity and time was wasted persecuting heathens. But key events accelerated the fall. Emperor Commodus's dictatorial rule and assassination led to the Year of the Five Emperors and civil war. Provinces began to break away, including the Gallic and Palmyrene empires. In 395, Theodosius I split the empire between his sons, Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west. Though not formally divided, this further weakened unity. The Western Empire soon faced relentless invasions from Goths, Huns, Vandals and others. Barbarian groups were allowed to settle in exchange for service, but often revolted when Rome failed its promises. Alaric, a Christian Visigoth, sacked Rome in 410, shaking its image of invincibility. Britain was abandoned as Rome could no longer defend it against Celtic raids. Economic strain worsened with reliance on grain imports from North Africa and Egypt. The loss of Carthage to the Vandals in 439 cut off this supply. Military costs surged, failure to pay soldiers led to mutinies. Leadership became erratic with puppet emperors and power held by corrupt generals. Soon, mercenary armies replaced Roman troops, but they lacked loyalty and skill. Attila the Hun invaded the west in the 450s, and the empire never recovered. In 476, Odoacer deposed Romulus Augustus, ending the Western Roman Empire. The East survived and even reclaimed Italy under Theodoric by 493, but Rome itself remained in ruins for centuries. The Byzantine Empire. While the Western Roman Empire declined and Catholic Christianity spread, the Greek-speaking Orthodox Byzantine Empire thrived around Constantinople. By the 1100s, Latin merchants, especially Venetians and Genoese, dominated trade in Constantinople and were seen as arrogant and exploitative. Resentment exploded in 1182 when angry mobs, backed by a new emperor, massacred thousands of Latin Catholics in Constantinople. This event poisoned relations with the Catholic West. When Emperor Alexios IV Angelos later asked the Crusaders for help to restore his throne in exchange for money, the plan backfired. The Fourth Crusade, originally aimed at the Holy Land, was diverted to Constantinople by Venice. In 1204, when Angelos couldn't pay, Crusaders sacked the city. The empire was carved up by Western powers and started its long collapse. The empire's economy crumbled. They pawned the crown jewels, faced civil wars, and struggled to hold onto power as Ottoman Turks expanded in Anatolia. Meanwhile, Venice and Genoa fought each other inside the empire, dragging the Byzantines into their rivalry. The Black Death further weakened Byzantium and accelerated Ottoman territorial gains. In 1453, Constantinople fell to the Ottomans under Sultan Mehmed. The Ottomans converted Hagia Sophia into a mosque, renamed the city Istanbul, but allowed Greek culture to survive in Venetian-controlled islands. The Abbasid Caliphate began to weaken after Caliph al-Ma'mun died in 833 AD. His brother al-Mutasim succeeded him, backed by Turkic mercenaries who owed loyalty only to gold. Al-Mutasim used them to bypass the traditional Arab nobility, which undermined old military structures and caused unrest in Baghdad. The nobility resisted, but a failed coup led to their execution. Al-Mutasim's son later tried to curb Turkish influence by replacing them with Arab and Armenian troops, and even ordering assassinations of Turkish leaders. In response, the Turks assassinated him, triggering a decade-long period where the caliphs became powerless puppets of the Turkish generals. Eventually, Shiite Buyids from Persia took Baghdad and ruled in the caliph's name. Meanwhile, the Fatimids, another Shiite dynasty, took North Africa and Egypt, establishing a rival caliphate in Cairo. In 1136, Caliph al-Muqtafi managed to reassert some Abbasid independence, but this was short-lived, because the Mongols were knocking. In 1258, Hulagu Khan sacked Baghdad after Caliph al-Mutasim refused to surrender. The city was destroyed, tens of thousands were killed, and the caliph was rolled in a carpet and trampled to death by horses. A symbolic Abbasid line continued under Mamluk protection in Cairo until 1517, when the last caliph surrendered to the Ottomans, ending the Abbasid dynasty. The Mongol Empire. After Genghis Khan's death in 1227, the Mongol Empire remained unified under his successors for about 33 years. His grandson Mönke attempted to centralize authority and resume large-scale conquests, but his death triggered the Tolhuid civil war between his brothers. Kubilai won and declared himself Great Khan in 1260, but the war shattered unity. The empire split into four major autonomous khanates: the Yuan dynasty in China, the Il Khanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Golden Horde in the Western Steppes. Though Kubilai retained the title of Great Khan, his influence outside China rapidly declined. Infighting became common within and between khanates. Meanwhile, the ruling elites of the Il Khanate and Yuan dynasty gradually adopted sedentary Persian and Chinese customs, which weakened their control. The Il Khanate collapsed in the 1330s after the last ruler died without an heir. The Yuan dynasty was expelled from China by the Ming in 1368, and the Mongols would eventually become vassals of the Qing Dynasty. The Chagatai Khanate fragmented early into competing warlord states. Much of its territory was absorbed by the Turco-Mongol Timur in the late 14th century. The Golden Horde remained relatively strong until the mid-1300s, but was weakened by the Black Death, internal power struggles, and rising local autonomy. Timur dealt a crippling blow to the Horde after his former ally Toktamish turned against him. By the late 1400s, the rising Russian Empire eventually absorbed all remains of the Golden Horde. The last remnant, the Crimean Khanate, was annexed by Catherine the Great in the late 18th century. The Inca Empire was the largest empire in the Western Hemisphere, stretching across much of the Andes with 10 million people at its height. It rose rapidly in the 15th century, beginning with the leadership of Pachacuti. His son, Topa Inca, continued the military campaigns and became emperor in 1471. Topa Inca was succeeded by his son, who pushed the empire even farther north, but his distant military campaigns strained the cohesion of the empire. In 1524, he was struck by a deadly fever, likely smallpox, introduced to the continent by earlier European arrivals in the Caribbean. The disease spread rapidly through the Inca population, which had no resistance, killing millions, including Huayna Capac and his designated heir. The resulting power vacuum triggered a brutal civil war between his surviving sons, Atahualpa and Huáscar. After years of conflict, Atahualpa emerged victorious, just as Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro arrived in Inca territory with a small force. Although the Incas outnumbered the invaders by thousands, the Spaniards' use of steel, firearms, cavalry, and shock tactics gave them a decisive edge. Atahualpa was captured during a surprise attack and later executed. Soon, the Inca capital of Cusco fell. The final blow came in 1572 when Spanish forces captured and executed the last Inca ruler, Tupac Amaru. The Songhai Empire, once one of the most powerful states in African history, rose to dominance in West Africa from the 15th century. Its foundation was laid by Soni Ali, who conquered much of the weakened Mali Empire. His son, Soni Baru, lacked the same authority and was soon overthrown by one of his father's generals, Mohammed Touré, or Askia the Great. Askia was a skilled administrator who shifted the empire's focus from conquest to governance. He built a centralized bureaucracy and promoted Islam as the official religion of the elite. Askia's reign ended when his son Musa deposed him. What followed was a steady decline marked by power struggles and ineffective leadership. The outer regions began to drift from central control, while the Moroccan Sultan Ahmad al-Mansur, eager to seize the riches of Songhai, launched raids. By 1586, internal rivalries had split the empire. Then, at the Battle of Tondibi, Moroccan forces crushed the Songhai army with superior weapons and looted every city. The Mughal Empire, once ruling over nearly a quarter of the world's population and famed for its wealth, the Taj Mahal and the Red Fort, began to unravel after the death of Emperor Aurangzeb in 1707. In the next 2 decades, the Mughal throne saw 7 different rulers, each weaker than the last, as regional leaders began asserting independence and withholding taxes. Amid this fragmentation, the British East India Company exploited the instability, offering military support to local rulers in exchange for influence. This allowed the company to gradually expand its control, most notably over Bengal, then one of the richest provinces in India. By the 19th century, the company had amassed a powerful army composed largely of Indian troops. In 1857, these soldiers revolted in an uprising that aimed to oust the British and revive Mughal authority. The rebellion was crushed, and in its aftermath, the British Crown dissolved the East India Company, exiled the last emperor Bahadur Shah II, and formally ended the Mughal Empire, replacing it with direct colonial rule. The Empire of Brazil came to an abrupt end in 1889 when a military coup led by Marshal Deodoro da Fonseca deposed Emperor Pedro II and declared the First Brazilian Republic. Republican ideas had been gaining ground among the elite, who viewed monarchy as outdated. The 1888 abolition of slavery further destabilized the empire as it alienated powerful landowners who had long backed the monarchy. Military leaders, especially veterans of the Paraguayan War, felt underappreciated, and their frustration translated into open support for a republican model. Earlier conflicts like the Ragamuffin War and fierce competition between liberal and conservative factions had already weakened imperial authority. When the coup occurred, Pedro II offered no resistance and calmly accepted exile. The coup ended the monarchy. Da Fonseca assumed the presidency, and the First Brazilian Republic adopted a new constitution. The Spanish Empire. Despite reaching unprecedented heights under Charles V, the empire's foundations were already unstable. Its overseas colonies were poorly managed, and rather than maintaining a strict state monopoly, Spain embraced illicit trade to keep revenue flowing. This weakened its ability to compete with other European powers who gradually overtook Spain in commerce and influence. As the economy crashed, Spain turned to excessive taxation. Ridiculous stuff like the Alcabala tax, levied on nearly all transactions, strained the population while government employees didn't pay taxes. Resistance grew and tax evasion became widespread. Some tax officials were even taken out, and many Spaniards emigrated to the Americas to escape. In the Netherlands, still under Spanish rule, mounting dissatisfaction over high taxes, neglect, and the spread of Calvinism sparked the Dutch Revolt. This escalated into a war with the Dutch and later with the French, weakening Spain even more. The revolt also encouraged Portugal, once under the same monarch, to break away in 1640. Inflation, driven by the issuance of copper currency in 1641, worsened Spain's financial crisis. Although the Bourbon monarchs, who replaced the ruling Habsburgs in the 18th century, tried to restore Spanish power through reforms, they were undercut by costly wars and the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, which limited Spanish dominance. Later, their trade reforms triggered conflict with Britain. The Spanish territories in South America remained loosely governed, valued more for their gold than for integration into the empire. When Napoleon invaded Spain in the early 19th century, colonial revolts erupted across Latin America, leading to independence movements that crushed Spanish control. The empire's final blow came with the Spanish-American War in 1898, when Spain lost its remaining overseas territories. The Qing Dynasty of China ruled for over 250 years and commanded the fourth largest empire in world history. But by the late 18th century, it began a long decline. The empire's population had soared beyond 300 million, yet tax rates remained low and government corruption was high, pushing the state into a fiscal crisis. The Qing's legitimacy started to falter as uprisings like the White Lotus Rebellion and conflicts between Jiraiya and Kafir Sufi groups fueled anti-Qing sentiment. Harsh bans on secret societies failed, with resistance peaking in a failed capital attack. By 1820, British merchants flooded the Chinese market with opium, which had become a major source of their income. When the emperor tried to suppress this, the British Empire attacked and imposed the Treaty of Nanking in 1842, forcing China to pay heavy reparations, increase the opium trade, and give Hong Kong to Britain. The Second Opium War began in 1856 and pitted the United Kingdom, France, Russia, and the US against the Qing Dynasty. The war resulted in a Chinese defeat and further concessions, including the legalization of the opium trade. Internally, the devastating Taiping Rebellion destabilized the empire further and caused tens of millions of deaths before being suppressed. In 1894, China suffered another blow in the First Sino-Japanese War, losing Taiwan and Korea to Japan. Then, the Boxer Uprising, aimed at expelling foreign imperialism and supported by the Empress, backfired and led to a humiliating defeat by a foreign eight-nation alliance. Widespread dissatisfaction culminated in the Xinhai Revolution of 1911. The last emperor, 6-year-old Puyi, abdicated in 1912, ending the Qing Dynasty and leading to the establishment of the Republic of China. The Russian Empire was at its peak in the late 19th century, but the Russo-Japanese War marked a turning point. Japan's unexpected victory humiliated the Russian state. The loss ignited domestic outrage, culminating in the 1905 revolution. On January 22nd, peaceful demonstrators marching to present a petition to Tsar Nicholas II were fired upon by imperial guards outside the Winter Palace in an event remembered as Bloody Sunday. The massacre galvanized widespread unrest and violent clashes across the empire, forcing the Tsar to implement a constitutional monarchy. Just 9 years later, Russia entered World War I. Nationalistic enthusiasm quickly faded as Nicholas II's leadership proved ineffective. The military suffered from poor logistics and insufficient supplies. As casualties mounted and economic conditions worsened, morale collapsed and desertion became widespread. In a disastrous move, Nicholas II assumed direct command of the army in 1915, tying his reputation directly to Russia's military failures. Meanwhile, his wife Alexandra's growing reliance on the scandalous mystic Rasputin discredited the monarchy further. By 1917, anger exploded. Women textile workers and laborers in Petrograd led mass protests against food shortages and working conditions. Troops ordered to suppress them instead joined in. The resulting February Revolution forced Nicholas II to abdicate, ending the Russian Empire. Later that year, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, capitalized on the chaos and seized power in the October Revolution. The ensuing civil war would determine the future of Russia. In 1918, the deposed Romanov family, Nicholas, Alexandra, and their 5 children, were murdered by Bolshevik revolutionaries. The German Empire existed for 47 years and was an industrial and scientific titan. By 1913, it had become the 3rd largest global economy, backed by the world's strongest army. It also created the 3rd largest colonial empire of its time, claiming territory in Africa and Oceania. The empire's decline began with the forced resignation of Chancellor Otto von Bismarck in 1890. Bismarck's careful diplomacy had kept Germany secure through a web of complex alliances. His successors couldn't preserve international relationships. Erratic decisions from Emperor Wilhelm II further isolated Germany diplomatically. Then, Germany was dragged into World War I due to an alliance with Austria-Hungary, who started the war. While Germany initially saw success, the final phase of the war unraveled the empire. The 100 Days Offensive launched by the Allies in 1918 broke the Western Front stalemate and caused massive casualties. Morale plummeted, civil unrest fueled by war weariness grew, and a mutiny erupted among the navy at Wilhelmshaven, triggered by an order to launch a hopeless attack against the British fleet. The mutiny quickly spread across Germany, sparking widespread rebellion, including the overthrow of King Ludwig III in Bavaria. This led to the November Revolution. Workers and soldiers revolted, bringing down the monarchy with little resistance. As violence flared between Republicans and Communists, supporters of a parliamentary democracy ultimately prevailed, paving the way for the Weimar Republic. Wilhelm II abdicated, effectively ending the German Empire. The Ottoman Empire. The 1870s brought crisis after crisis for the once mighty Ottoman Empire. A failed harvest led to uprisings in Bosnia and Herzegovina, followed by financial collapse. Revolts also broke out in Bulgaria, and Sultan Abdul Aziz was overthrown. While the Ottomans suppressed the Bulgarian uprising, their brutal tactics provoked international backlash. Russia intervened and, after victory, imposed the Treaty of San Stefano, turning the Balkans into Russian satellites. Then the European powers intervened, redrawing the map again to grant full independence to Romania, Serbia, and Montenegro. The economy, meanwhile, was handed over to the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, giving European creditors control over tobacco, cotton, and other vital industries. In 1882, the British occupied Egypt to secure the Suez Canal, dealing another blow. The Young Turk Revolution in 1908 began in Macedonia and forced Sultan Abdul Hamid to reinstate the constitution. A counter-coup the next year failed, and power increasingly shifted to the Young Turks, a reformist movement pushing for a constitutional government. Then came the Italo-Turkish War, in which the Ottomans lost Libya, followed by the First Balkan War, where they lost Albania and nearly all remaining Balkan territory. Joining the Central Powers during World War I would seal the fate of the empire, with the highest death toll per capita. After the defeat in 1918, Britain and France carved up the empire under the Sykes-Picot Agreement. The collapse of Ottoman authority triggered the Turkish War of Independence, led by Mustafa Kemal. He expelled Allied forces, abolished the Sultanate in 1922, and dismantled what was left of the Ottoman state. The Empire of Japan. By the late 1920s, urban Japan had grown wealthier and more liberal, while rural areas descended into poverty. The 1929 global crash worsened the divide, leaving Japan unable to feed its population. The government's response failed, and the military pushed for expansion into Manchuria to secure resources. In 1931, a bombing on Japanese-owned rail lines, blamed on Chinese nationalists, was used as a pretext for invasion. Japan's army acted independently, and the government had lost control. General Araki Sadao's propaganda vilified Western values and democracy while promoting Japanese racial superiority. Under General Nagata, Japan shifted to a total war economy. Later, General Hideki Tojo, through secret police power, consolidated the militarist factions. By 1938, Prime Minister Konoe's national mobilization law handed the military unchecked power, dissolving democracy entirely by 1940 into a totalitarian system. In 1941, the US oil embargo provoked Japan's attacks on Pearl Harbor and several British colonies. Though Japan saw early success, including the 1942 conquest of Singapore, overreach and Allied counterattacks began reversing its gains. Later, the US fire bombings of Tokyo caused over 100,000 deaths and crippled morale. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by the United States in August 1945 inflicted 150,000 casualties and further destruction. The final blow came with the Soviet invasion of Manchuria. Japan surrendered unconditionally in September 1945. The Allied occupation dismantled the Japanese military and restructured the government into a parliamentary democracy. The British Empire. At its peak in the 19th and early 20th centuries, the British Empire was the largest in history and the dominant global power. Its collapse, mostly completed by the mid-1960s, was primarily driven by the immense strain of World War II. The war left Britain economically shattered and militarily overstretched, with colonial defeats, especially in East and Southeast Asia, damaging its prestige. At the same time, nationalist movements surged across the empire, particularly in India, which gained independence in 1947, setting off a wave of decolonization. Britain's post-war inability to maintain control over its colonies, combined with the rise of the United States as a superpower with an anti-colonial stance, accelerated the empire's dissolution. The Cold War further reduced the strategic value of maintaining colonies. The 1956 Suez Crisis exposed Britain's diminished global role, and the 1997 handover of Hong Kong to China symbolically marked the empire's end. The Portuguese Empire. Portugal was the first global empire with vast colonies across Africa and Asia. It initially thrived through maritime exploration but was weakened early by corruption, smuggling, and mismanagement under its absolute monarchy. Though the empire tried to maintain control, it failed to adapt to the rise of capitalism, while exiled Portuguese Jews helped develop modern capitalist enterprises like the Dutch East India Company, which soon outcompeted Portugal globally. The empire's decline accelerated with the rise of stronger colonial rivals like the Dutch and British, and events like the Lisbon earthquake of 1755 and the Napoleonic invasions further destabilized Portugal. The 20th century brought costly colonial wars in Africa and mounting resistance in Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau. These conflicts contributed to the Carnation Revolution, which overthrew Portugal's authoritarian regime and triggered rapid decolonization. The empire's formal end came with the return of Macau to China in 1999, but by then Portugal had already lost all other colonies.